friends. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Page Turners Plus. Today we're discussing Till the Well Runs Dry. You'll remember that we discussed two other novels by Lauren Francis-Sharma. This is her first novel. Um, this novel, the story begins in 1943 in Trinidad, and it stays there until 1965, except for a very brief but very significant detour to Maryland and New York in the United States. This is a family saga. The main tension in this story arises from the marriage between a woman of mixed African and European descent and a Trinidadian man of Indian heritage, but with mixed Hindu and Muslim religious origin. The story is very familiar. The man's family objects to the marriage and cut the couple off. The couple is left to navigate very difficult times without a support network. Um, so today, we're a small group today. It's just Francine, Deborah, and me. So let me start off by asking Francine and Deborah if they identified with any of the characters or even liked any of them.
Tough start. um, I'm not sure I would say I identified necessarily with any of the characters, but I think I would most say that there were many characters that I understood. Um, I would say that probably my favorite character was probably Jacqueline. I think I felt the most sympathy for her. I mean, she was a child for the majority of the book. And so because of that, I felt a lot of sympathy for her and, I was rooting for her, so to speak. I don't know how you guys felt.
This was definitely an interesting read because it definitely took me through the emotions, the good feelings and the bad, with every single one of these characters. I agree with Francine in terms of feeling sympathetic towards Jacqueline and appreciating her precociousness and and also appreciating how blunt she is or was and how that got her into trouble sometimes. But I'm also curious about another character who we didn't get to hear from at all, and I would have loved to hear from her, especially being a firstborn girl child myself. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. That was one thing I felt for me that I felt was missing. I would have loved to have learned more about Patsy. I felt we didn't get to know Patsy well enough to understand what was really going on with her.
I agree with you both. I would, especially since Patsy is the problem child. I think it it just didn't feel fair that we didn't hear from her, as to why she was behaving the way she was. We heard from we heard Marcia's assessment of Patsy, which felt fair to me because Marcia said something to the effect of Patsy only looks out for herself, and you need to know your children. And it felt fair, but then Patsy had so much to deal with. Not that she had more to deal with than the other children, but she did have a lot to deal with. So I felt sympathetic towards her, despite the fact that she was giving her parents hell. I felt sympathetic towards her, and I would have liked to know what was going on in her head. Apart from the fact that her mother, and I have no reason to believe her mother didn't know her. Her mother said that she was self. On a similar note, when Marcia turns Jacqueline out of the house, Miss Jacqueline meets Miss Claire. She goes and Miss Claire rescues her. And Miss Claire says to Jacqueline, I never cared much for your mother because she's a mean woman. Um, do you believe that that was an accurate description of Marcia?
I believe it was to a degree. But I also believe that Marcia Garcia is basically, I don't want to lean into the expression a product of her circumstances. Marcia had a hard life, but in terms of reading and thinking about how I would describe her, I came up with these three terms: burden, bondage, beleaguered, because that was her existence from the time we were introduced to her to the very end, where she, eventually takes off with the two, well, not to be too spoilery, the two children. I understand why Miss Claire would say that she's a mean woman, but I also see why she would be quote unquote mean, because she always has to be on the defensive. She always has to be having her guard up, having to struggle and scrape. And so it's she's not somebody who lived a soft life, so I don't expect her to be a soft person, even though there were moments where she was very compassionate and very friendly and considerate towards her children and others. Yes, she would be mean because she's had to be mean to survive.
I think I'm always the one who is sympathetic to the quote unquote mean characters. I don't know what that says about me. Because I did not find Marcia mean at all. I was very surprised when Miss Claire described her as mean. It probably says a lot about me and about the people I know. Because if Marcia is mean, in my view, she's a very mild form of mean. Um, I don't
I
know.
I found she was very complex, I think. There were definitely, like you said, Deborah, there were times when she was really loving and compassionate and she did all these wonderful things with with the children. But then there were other times when she really did things that I didn't understand, especially with regards to Jacqueline. Like when I think someone already said it, so I'll just go with it. When she put Jacqueline out, I confess I was lost as to why. To me, that was very mean. And I didn't understand. I mean, I understood her reason, the reasons that she gave for doing it. She was angry because of what Jacqueline did. But I still found it was an exaggerated response to what was happening, especially because it was Jacqueline, the one who, to me, was kind of like holding them all together. She made a silly mistake, but she was a child, you know? So
Yeah, but
I don't know. She was complex. Marcia was complex.
Deborah described her as beleaguered, and I think that is
Mm,
the response of a beleaguered woman. Um, Jacqueline is her best child, and she's lost Patsy, and she's thinking, I need to do something extreme. I wasn't tough enough with Patsy. Look at the situation I'm in with Patsy. I have to do something extreme to make sure, because she didn't think that Jacqueline was going to go anywhere except to her father's house.
right.
So she thought Jacqueline was going to be absolutely safe. So I don't know. I think it was not a wise decision, but she was beleaguered.
Yes, it was definitely a decision out. I felt the frustration. I felt how betrayed. I saw how betrayed she Marcia felt in that moment, especially because, as you say, Paula, Jacqueline is her best child. Why would Jacqueline go and sell her out like that to the father? And it there's something at the back of that that I hope we would talk about a little bit more. But it's the innocence of Jacqueline bringing this up, maybe hoping that it would get her and her father and her mother back together, not realizing the extent of the animosity between them. And again, because they're not speaking to her, Marcia is not speaking to her about the true conflict that exists between her and and Farouk. So how would Jacqueline know, and how would Jacqueline feel like what she was doing? How could she possibly feel like what she said was some kind of betrayal? even though she in effect betrays her mom by revealing this information. I felt both. I think that's one of the beauties of the text is that Sharma is able to have us see the child's perspective in this way, but also understand completely the frustration of Miss Beleaguered Marcia Garcia.
Right, because for me, like, I think Jacqueline, like you said, she's probably trying to see if she could get her parents back together. She loves both her mother and her father. She's torn between the two of them. She's not clear on what exactly has gone wrong between the two of them because they've never really told the children, their history. And so she was trying to get close to her dad, I guess, by telling him something that she knew. But yeah, that's why I'm saying, to me, I understand that Marcia obviously was very upset by that, but this is her best child. Like, why would you throw out your best child? I don't get that.
Mhm. All right, since we've broached the topic of the father, let's discuss. Well, let me just throw out the question: would "Sins of the Father" be a good alternative title for this book?
Yes, short answer. And if I could go a little further, he was, oh my goodness, where do we start with Farouk? He's not the only father figure I find who was derelict in their duty, but he to me was so spiteful. He was so spiteful. He was negligent. He was selfish. He was feckless. I could go on. Um, and in the end, and it just so you realize I'm not a fan of this character at all. In the end, he was still aborted and on the oldest child. So that is all I could say about Farouk for right now. And I couldn't for the life of me understand why this man, after all of this time, because as you pointed out at the beginning, Paula, the novel starts in the 40s and ends in the 60s, and he is still walking around with this infernal bag of tea that is the source of all of the problems. So I was so glad to see the back of him, but still very, very sympathetic and very sorrowful for Patsy that she has to be the one. Like her life is just about to be about taking care of him now.
I think Deborah has said it all. I don't think I have anything I can add. I think we probably all felt the exact same way about Farouk. There are times when you're just wanted to wring his neck. Like, what are you doing? Just, you know. Except, I mean, there were a couple moments, when he went to rescue Patsy. We have to give him props for that. I don't know. Y'all don't have to give him props for that. I'm giving him props for rescuing Patsy. And towards the end, when he finally got rid of this ridiculous tea, it looked like maybe he was going to, finally get it. But then, of course, things fell apart again after that.
I tried so hard to give this man some grace. I tried so hard. But when me and he fall out, really, when he introduces Jacqueline to his mother as Jacqueline Garcia, I was so livid. That is such a betrayal. I mean, Farouk was betraying his family left, right, and center, right? But that particular betrayal, I just could, and it really was hurtful, especially since Jacqueline is the one who looked like his mother. And the mother's, I, I, I was, well, I was livid with the mother too, because it is obvious that this is your grandchild. The picnic look like you, and you just reject this child out of hand because she's half black. I mean, I know it happens, and probably shouldn't be so vexed about it, but that was really vexing for me.
And not just
But
that she's half black on her, she's from a family wrapped up in scandal.
right.
She belongs to a woman who is from the bush, as she said, and furthermore, she is from the bush, and she's wrapped up in scandal, because that cloud followed Marcia and her family for decades. And
Yeah. But
you
Deborah,
know,
she decided she didn't like Marcia even before they
from the
knew that,
beginning. Yeah,
because they went and searched for the scandal. They didn't
yeah.
know that at the beginning. One of you discussed the tea, um, or mentioned, both of you mentioned the tea. How is Obia? What do you think about the way Obia is addressed in this novel? Um, what is it? Just is Obia something powerful, or does the novel suggest that it's just the power of suggestion?
I think for Farouk, it was all about the power of suggestion. For me, I mean, I didn't see that there was anything. He believed that what Tanti, what was her name?
Gertrude.
Tanti Gertrude. He believed that what Tanti Gertrude gave him would do what she said, and so according to him, it worked. For me, the way it was portrayed was more power of suggestion than an actual power. Although there were some very strange things happening though with Tanti Gertrude and her daughter. So I don't know. I think it was yeah, maybe it was a mix of the two.
Yeah, there is definitely an ambivalence about Obia in the text, because,
Mm.
as you say, Francine, there is the power of suggestion. Come, let us drink the tea. Come, let us have the tea. And then from the first sip, everything else, it was just downhill for Marcia Garcia after that, right? But then there's also the moment, the two incidents that happened. Um, the first was when Marcia took, well, when she went to visit Ma, what's her name, Miss Gertrude, Tanti Gertrude, after the birth of Yvonne, and she tried to leave, and the scene was so vividly described of how her heart started to beat, like palpitations, and she could move, and the walls were caving, something to that effect, and she collapsed, and she couldn't hear anything, she couldn't see anything. And then there was the other incident where and interestingly enough, that was conveyed through Jacqueline's perspective, that she Marcia Garcia confronted Tanti Gertrude's daughter, and the
Mm.
woman collapsed on the road dead. No kind of explanation.
Right. Well, I feel
So
like there's an
there's an
explanation.
ambivalence there for
Right.
sure.
Because I mean, in the case where Marcia collapsed, I mean, Tanti Gertrude actually knows her bushes and her, the difference. So she could have easily slipped her something that would have made her experience all of that without it necessarily being some sort of magic.
Some kind of
Um,
time release
right,
portion.
something. I mean, she knows her herbs and her bushes and her whatever, right? So that is not without, that's not too mysterious. At least I didn't find it too mysterious. She poisoned her, a slight type of poison or something. The daughter falling down dead, well, that was definitely mysterious. But yeah, like you said, it was very ambivalent. I found it ambivalent. I don't know what Paula thinks.
I was worried about the novel treating Obia the way our colonizers treated
Mm,
Obia. That worried me. The assumption that Obia is something evil, um, when it's really a religion, and it's not only a religion. It's also medical practices. Um, so I was worried about that, just assuming that what our colonizers told us about Obia is true. Because I think I've lived long enough to question everything our colonizers told us. I mean,
And
I haven't really researched the subject, but I have read enough and, seen lectures that suggest to me that what our colonizers, we really should take it with not just a pinch of salt, like a pound of salt. So,
that is a fair point too, Paula, because On the one hand, we have this sort of traditional representation, or at least the worry that you are identifying, I think, is legitimate. And it's sort of further amplified by the fact that when what's her name, the little baby Yvonne, when she got sick, the bush doctor kept dismissing her symptoms and was basically ineffectual in healing her. So there is definitely something there in the way these traditionalists, the traditional type healing and practices, is depicted in the novel.
And it makes me actually, as we're thinking about that, if we compare it with the book we read last month, The Salt Roads, it was treated very differently in The Salt Roads. It will be a natural and healing with the bush, a natural healing. It was treated quite differently.
The events of this novel begin, as I said in the introduction, in 1943 and end in
Yes.
1965. Do you think this story that is told in this novel is a story which is peculiarly a story of that era? For me, it felt very familiar because I suspect that I am a similar age. Lauren and I are, of similar age, and I grew up hearing the story. It felt familiar because the story I read in this novel felt like the stories I grew up hearing as well. I suspect Lauren, this novel was inspired by stories she heard from her parents. And one of the things that really resonated with me was how difficult it was to get an education because those were the stories I heard as well. Um, the the politics the we it remains that's interesting because she makes you know that she makes you know that the independence movement is growing, but the politics is never at the forefront of this novel. It's in the background, and it remains firmly placed in the background. It never really comes out. um, but it did feel very familiar to me, and it felt as if certainly the struggles around getting an education that felt like something which was peculiar to that era.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard, similar stories. I know people in my family that stopped going to school around the same age as these kids would have because, they didn't pass the exam or the family couldn't afford to pay for further education. So yeah, all of that did feel very familiar to me, um, in that period. And also the lead up to independence. I like that she included that. She had actual historical figures in the story as well as her fictional characters to lend a lot of context to the time being. But like you said, Paula, it did remain in the background, but we were aware of the overall context of the times.
Yeah, and I kept thinking about other works that came out, like classic West Indian literature that came out around that time or that were set in that time, that around the period of independence, liberation, agitation, and so on. And it was interesting to see the references to Eric Williams, and also the references to the war, the Second World War, and how, even at the end, you saw this U.S. Marine, was it a Marine or a U.S. soldier, basically telling Farouk that he can't walk here
Right.
for whatever reason. And I couldn't help but think about all of these things that are rooted in our Caribbean history that seem kind of pertinent now, especially, um, that are informing the background of that novel, that are happening. But I like that the book focuses on the regular folk, so to speak, and how they are navigating this space that is definitely affected by extraneous forces, but they're not front and center.
Well, the story is told from the perspective of three characters, Marcia, Farouk, and Jacqueline. Why do you think the author chose Jacqueline as a main character rather than any of her other siblings? I think maybe Jacqueline is the voice of reason.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we would get a balanced portrayal of what is happening around. I think she probably was just a very safe choice. She's a reliable narrator. It's probably easier for an author to deal with a reliable narrator than an unreliable one. So
Right. Because even as much as I would have liked to have heard more from Patsy, I'm not sure how much of what Patsy said we would have been able to trust, actually, because she was a wild card. I have to say, I was very saddened by that, because when Patsy was born, it was like there was hope for Marcia and Farouk. They were starting their family. He was like, okay, my family doesn't want anything to do with me. That's fine. I have my wife, I have my daughter, and there was hope for them. And then, I don't know, somewhere along the line, things went wrong.
Right. I honestly was surprised when Jacqueline's point of view was introduced,
Mm.
especially because I listened to the book. I didn't have a physical copy, so I don't know if they if I had the physical copy, I would have been alerted to, I guess, a change in the based on the table of contents and the chapter titles. But as I was listening, and I heard, oh, Jacqueline Farouk, Jacqueline perspective being introduced, I was like, okay, this is a choice. I think it works in the sense that we get to see the actions of the parents from one of the children's perspective, right? And we get to see how she interacts with them, the humorous exchange she has between both of them on different occasions, and it did give me a sense of hope for her, you know. But I was a little surprised at the shift because it comes nearly into like the second third of the second, yeah, closer to the second third or end of the second half of the novel or something like that, or the first half of the novel. It was a late introduction.
are all the men in the novel either ineffectual or brutal predators?
I think the only one who probably doesn't fit that description is Farouk's first boss. What was he? Duncan? He seemed like a decent guy from what I remember, but all of the other men, I mean, Farouk's father, Marcia's uncle, the gangster, gosh, the Marcia's father, they were all one of those things, Paula. They were either ineffective, cruel, criminal.
But how about Mr. Aldous?
Oh, Mr. Aldous. I forgot about Mr. Aldous. Although he was a little bit, I found him a little bit shifty,
Yes.
right?
Yes, we'd be worried about the age difference between him
Right.
and Jacqueline.
Because, he was a teacher. She was still a school age child when they met. She was no longer in school, but she was still a school age child. So there was that little,
The 9 year gap.
yeah. And at first I was thinking, well, maybe because back in the day, a lot of the teachers in the primary schools were like literally like 17 or 18 because they had just finished. I was like, well, maybe he's actually not that much older. But then we do find out later that in fact, yes, he is. So that was a bit like, hmm. But apart from that, I think we could say he was a pretty decent man, and he really wanted the best for Jacqueline. At least that was the impression I got.
And for Yvonne too.
And for Yvonne as well, yes. I think it actually started with Yvonne, who was a
Right.
student, and then extended to Jacqueline. Yeah.
Right.
And then there was a young man who saved Marcia from the
In
streets in New
in
York.
New York, yes.
Right. Yes. That's right.
But for the most part, these men are very, they fail as protectors,
Hmm.
and on the they're neglectful. I mean, I oh my goodness,
And
For me too.
a lot of them are cowards too, because
Yes,
they just when stuff gets really bad, they just kind of go off and hide, in Toko or wherever.
like I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine Marcia's father still being alive after all of this time. I was just surprised to learn that this, hope this is not too spoilery, just surprised to learn that this man was off somewhere, um,
Well,
just chilling, like, I
but
know he
I mean,
wasn't just chilling, but yeah.
they never, right. He wasn't just chilling. In fact, he ended up being quite useful finally. Um, but they never actually said that he died, right? They said that the villagers ran him off. We were made to believe that he was dead, but
And another thing that I found interesting is that it's not just the men in Trinidad. It's the ones, with the exception of the young man who saved her on the
on the
subway or the
street, on the
streets,
sub. Oh, and
right?
there was the older man
Who she was following.
who she was following, the homeless man as well, who
Yes.
helped her in his own way to survive those first couple of nights in New York. So there was him. Yeah, sorry, Deborah, but you were saying.
Yeah, and I was just saying that there were men, like, across, like, continents, across bodies of water, who were just like predators,
Hmm.
and the gentleman, well, gentleman is still generous, that man who had her in the barn, and his
Right.
wife,
Hmm.
the one who where she was working, who in the bakery, I forget his name.
Mr. Harry.
Yes, who she was working in, and then he basically set this other guy on to go and set this other guy up to go and attack her, basically. So I was like, come on, let's redeem yourselves. What are y'all doing? Let me
Hmm.
get a good,
But
give
he had
me
an
some kind of good
explanation.
impression, huh?
Yeah, he did have an explanation. He said,
He had an explanation for that.
What was his
hmm,
explanation? I
Yeah,
might have missed that.
no, he just mentioned her.
right.
He
He
did
just
not expect
mentioned,
the man
Oh,
to go and
right.
attack her.
Right. I mean,
Yes.
and
Mhm.
remember, this is the man that was supposed to be with her roommate.
roommate,
So
right,
like
right.
he's just out and out awful, you know? Um yeah, they were not very good. There were a few good men, but for the
And the
most
lawyer,
part,
the
and
lawyer
the
was looking
lawyer.
at her funny too. I'm like, golly.
I don't know about that. I don't know that we saw enough of the lawyer to think he meant her ill. He was just like, if you don't have any money, what are you doing in front of me?
Right.
Um, yeah. And if you don't have any, you don't have your story right, well, I can't help you.
Right.
I don't think there was anything to suggest that the lawyer was a bad person. We saw the gentleman that she would nurse later, and he seemed also to be a kind person. The
Mhm.
doctor's husband, who was ailing.
Right.
So men aren't treated. All men are not treated badly in this novel.
The ones that
Moving
stand
along.
out.
Yes, I agree. The important characters, most of them are pretty horrible.
Mhm.
Um, After her experience in the United States, why do you think Marcia would believe immigration was a good idea for her children? I thought perhaps I had no reason to believe that Marcia was not a rational human being. So perhaps the story didn't tell us the details. Maybe we were meant to fill that in ourselves. Um, but I would have had no reason to believe that Marcia, given the kind of human being she is, would make an irrational decision. So, to be honest, that's not something that caused me any concern. I don't know what the rest of you thought.
Um, I was kind of surprised that she was still wanted to take them. I think I understand why she would take because yeah, no, actually I don't understand because completely. Because Wesley had taken over the sewing business and he had clients, so he actually was gainfully employed. And Jacqueline was developing a relationship with Mr. Aldous, even though he agreed that she should go. I just felt like I know I don't know. I guess I didn't understand. Like, is she doing it because she wanted to take them out of the horrible situation with Farouk's family? Was that the reason that she thought maybe it's just better for them to just make a complete break from Trinidad and just start over? And why leave Patsy behind? I have questions, so can y'all enlighten me?
Yeah, I have questions too. But I believe, especially about the fact, especially around the idea that these, or rather, especially because, as you say, Francine, the two children were finding their footing, Pat basically trying to chart their own way. But I think that Marcia Garcia brought them to the States because she is betting on herself. She believes that she will make it, and she once she makes it, she will make it, ensure that her children will make it. She is always betting on herself, and she's had to always bet on herself and find her own way. So despite what she experienced, especially in Maryland, and despite the struggles, when she first came to New York, um, she is definitely one of those tenacious type characters who will not give up, and because she is driven especially by the you know the not wanting to bring shame to her children, wanting to ensure that she could take care of them, she bets on herself. And then because she's betting on herself despite the experiences, she knows that she will persevere, and therefore her children will persevere, still side-eyeing her for leaving Patsy behind. But I think that is what it is at the core. If she can't save Yvonne, unfortunately she can't save Patsy, she will definitely save Jacqueline and Wesley.
I don't think she meant to leave Patsy permanently, She could only take two at this time. So she took Wesley and she took
Jacqueline.
Jacqueline. But the impression I got was that she meant to get Patsy later. I didn't think she had abandoned Patsy. All right, let's go back a little bit now. Why do you think Marcia chose to keep quiet about the family secret, even to the point of letting Farouk believe something terrible about her? Francine, you have any thoughts on that?
I really don't. That's why I wanted to ask the question. I found it very strange that she would not. He is supposed to be the love of her life, right? I just found it strange that she would not set him straight. Maybe she was. I get, and I understand she was angry at the fact that he believed what he heard, because he believed it without even questioning it, and then he came to, like, basically accuse her of whatever. So that I get. He didn't even give her the benefit of the doubt. But I'm guessing maybe I guess at the root of it was probably shame, and maybe she was also still she's trying to protect the boys as well. Those are the two ideas I have about the decisions that she made.
I think too
I
is
think
because she's loyal to her sister, and is
Hmm.
a way to protect her sister. especially after witnessing the birth of the boys and seeing her sister, what happened as a result. I think is a way, like, she, again, this little girl from the time we meet her, is putting herself on the line for others, putting herself, and it's tragic, but I feel like she that is one of the burdens that she carries, that this burden of protecting her sister, especially because now that I'm thinking about it, she talks about, in she mentions in at one point, staring down the uncle, and that is how, when she stares him down, that is how she knows, he is able to, that's how he decides, okay, I'm not gonna go after Marcia this time, I'm
Mm.
gonna go after Ginny, I think the sister was called. And because she didn't tell Ginny that, that was the secret to ward off his advances, which probably would not have made much of a difference anyway. She felt a kind of guilt
Guilt.
because of it.
Mm.
So maybe it's a combination of guilt and as well as loyalty to the sister, that she felt she should have been able to do more to help, even though both of them were powerless in under those circumstances, especially because the other man in their life did not do anything to protect them.
Mhm.
Victims of sexual violence, though, very often feel shame as if they're responsible for it. And remember that she was also, even though Ginny suffered, I don't know if you can really say more, because um, she was abused more often. Yes, so Ginny was abused more often than Marcia was, but Marcia was also a victim of sexual violence. And to and society blames women who are victims of sexual violence as well. Um, and Farouk, I mean, granted, it's later that we learn this, but Farouk was very, very liberal with the word whore. You remember him describing his daughter thus, and even suggesting that maybe even Jacqueline is.
Yes.
So I think,
Another nail
this
in
is
the Farouk coffin.
right, right. I think just she lives in this society. She knows how women are viewed, how women are treated when they're victims of sexual violence. So she can't talk about it, and she's also internalized the sexual violence. She probably views it as something shameful herself. So I think it's understandable. No, this is a historical. We've discussed the fact that this is a historical novel and it starts in 43, ends in 65, and that we've also said that the history remains in the background of the novel. Did you did you feel that there should have been more history in the foreground of the novel? Um, no. All
No,
right.
no, I find it work. I found that its treatment as backdrop was, you know, was fine. Um, yeah, I found that I didn't have any objection to how it was part of the backdrop, affecting indirectly, but not front and center the way, um, you know, uh, uh, the way other historical texts might work.
Because I feel I agree with you, and I think for a lot of the people that we met in the book, all of this stuff was a backdrop for them. This was not something that they were intimately involved in, right? So all of this was happening, Eric Williams, the election. Okay, they're aware of it, but for them, this is they're focused on day-to-day survival, right? They're not part of the political parties or that sort of stuff. So I think the way that it was treated, I think, was effective.
If you had to describe this novel in one word, what would that word be? I will start. For me, familiar. And I think I've already said why familiar works for me. Anybody else wants to give it a shot?
One word, huh? Um, I would say emotional. Yeah,
Why emotion?
emotional.
Why emotional?
Well, I teared up quite a few times, actually. I was very surprised that I did, in fact. But there were quite a few times when I really felt the emotion in the story.
Deborah, you want
Probably
to give it a shot?
probably not the best word, but that's what comes to mind when I think of it right now.
Um, a few words come to mind. I don't think any one, or maybe I could come up with a portmanteau that incorporates drama, tragic, and meandering. I guess if I could just merge all of those words together. But I feel of all of the three that I just mentioned, I think tragic is the one that stands out the most, especially because of the children. I feel like the children were really put through the paces by these adults, for better and for worse. Some well meaning, others definitely dastardly. And I just felt for the children. So I would say tragic.
I didn't think of it as tragic because we were left on this very hopeful note. It was certainly everybody had a rough time. They had a rough time of it, but I think we ended. I think the novel ended on a hopeful note. So I didn't find it depressing. I was anxious, like Francine said, she was emotional. I I was anxious for a lot of this novel. Like um, Lauren Francis-Sharma knows how to create tension.
Yes.
And we in every all of the novels, she knows how to create tension. That is it, though. We've run out of time. Um, Thank you very much for spending some time with us. The next time you see us, we'll be speaking with Lauren about this novel. Bye for now.